Welcome, everyone. My name is Patty Katz. I'm the president of Reach Out America, and thank you all for joining us today. It's been kind of a crazy month, a lot of good stuff, and we're going to talk. Robert's going to talk about this today. We're going to probably have lots of questions for you, Robert.
Okay.
But just to tell you a little story, about 4 years ago, we scheduled our meeting with Tom DiNapoli as our guest speaker, and it was the day after. The meeting was the day after the 2016 presidential election. And many of us the night before were with Rita at her house celebrating her birthday and what we thought was going to be the election of our very first female president, Hillary Clinton. And as the party went on, our expressions of joy slowly started turning to disbelief and horror. And on the following days, our members they were looking forward to an illuminating discussion and a celebration with Tom. And yet at the party, we were all like so unbelievably depressed. And we were all thinking, I know I was thinking, like, who is going to show up to this meeting tomorrow? We were like horrified. And the following day, we arrived and we ended up having one of the biggest meetings we've ever had. And it was at that moment I realized the power of the members of Reach Out America. We all showed up, knowing we had great work to do. And honestly, we've been pushing to make change ever since. I can't express the gratitude that I have for this remarkable group. We will not stop until we can satisfy and achieve our mission statement. And I want to read our mission statement because it's so perfect. To work with others in social and political action in order to safeguard our constitutional rights. Furthermore, we work to help America find peaceful solutions to world problems while strengthening democracy at home. Now, 4 years later, we continue the good fight. I think we can all agree it seems as if Donald Trump's greatest achievement was to ignite a spark in Americans to not take democracy for granted ever again. So today we have a wonderful program. Our guest speaker, Robert Zimmerman, he and I have known each other since Great Neck North High. And through the years, I've had the privilege to work with Robert, and his sound advice, his deep knowledge, and his political savvy have inspired me and guided me so much. He is the co-president of ZE Communications. Robert has so many outstanding achievements, honors, and appointments. I'm only going to mention a few. President of what? You're like, stop. No. No, I want to just people need to know. President Obama nominated him on the National Committee for Humanities. Governor Andrew Cuomo appointed him to the New York State Sage Commission. And he served on the Kennedy Center Presidential Commission on the Arts by President Clinton. He's a Democratic National Committeeman, and he regularly appears on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. I'm extremely honored to call him my friend. Sorry, Robert, I had to do that. I'm very honored to call him my friend. So please, let's welcome Robert Zimmerman. I know it's Zoom, so I'm going to clap for everybody. But Robert, thank you so much for being here.
First of all, thank you, Patty, for the kind words. I'm so thrilled to be back with Reach Out America. I always tease Tom DiNapoli that he got the short straw 4 years ago, and I'm glad I got the opportunity to speak to you today. But it's such a defining moment for our country, and Reach Out America has played such a pivotal role in getting us there. And I know some of you folks think, well, we're only one organization, but what you have done in terms of engendering activism, what you've done in terms of your national outreach, thousands of postcards you've made. So many of you I know were doing phone banking. The impact you've had locally, you're not just the conscience of the political community, you're the activists of the political community. And I've known you and seen you grow since one of my dearest friends in the world, Fran Reed, was one of your founders. I saw what Rita Hall has done with Reach Out America, and I just admire her so much. And of course, Patty, you're my high school hero. So it's, and I mean that sincerely. So seeing what you've done in your leadership and seeing what you've done as members. And by the way, if I ever fail to mention Reach Out America when I speak, Harriet Becker makes sure to remind me. So Harriet, I know you're there. And so she's one of your great advocates. I don't know who's on the call, so it's hard for me to acknowledge you folks. And I know many of you personally. And we're at such a defining moment. I first want to begin by just acknowledging today's Veterans Day. And for so many of us who have veterans in their families, like my dad, who's 98, celebrating Veterans Day, and for so many of us that have men and women in their families who are veterans, it's just important to say thank you, to honor their service, and also in the same way we honor your political activism at Reach Out, because the role we all played in this election was really about saving our democracy and following through on the mission that so many people risked and gave their lives for, protecting a peaceful transition of power, protecting our constitutional rights, and also protecting our democratic process. And the one thing, and I'll get to this a bit later, one of the great eye-opening experiences of the Trump presidency, which thank goodness is coming to a close, is watching how vulnerable our democratic system is. First, let's do a quick recap. Joe Biden is the president-elect. Kamala Harris is the vice president-elect. All the talk you hear to the contrary are political pundits with too much time on their hands or trying to get some media time. It's done, it's over. In fact, Joe Biden received the strongest support of a presidential challenger since FDR against Herbert Hoover. I think some of you may have seen those statistics. He will go on to win 74 more delegates than Donald Trump and receive not just an electoral mandate, but I think when the balloting is over and all the millions of ballots from New York and California are included in the overall total, you're going to see him perhaps get 52%. And to put that in perspective, when Ronald Reagan beat Walter Mondale in that landslide in '84, it was only about, I think, 56 or 57%. So my point is, receiving 52 as a challenger to an incumbent president, it is, what I said, the largest victory for a challenger since FDR defeated Herbert Hoover. That gives you some historical perspective on how enormous this is. So therefore, all of us being activists and progressives, in the midst of this tremendous mandate, what do we focus on? How come we didn't do better? What happened in the House and the Senate? And we focus on that. And so I want to talk a little bit about that for a moment, because I think it's very illuminating. Because while Trump is going and is gone January 20th, and let's be very mindful of the damage he can do before he leaves, and we should talk about that a bit. I want to talk about the House and Senate races and what it says about our country and says about the challenges we face as a nation and we face individually. First of all, looking at the House, there were roughly 30 Democratic seats that were achieved in districts Donald Trump carried, meaning these are tough districts. Now, when he wasn't on the ballot in 2018, we made extraordinary inroads. But his being on the ballot, of course, gave greater impetus for his supporters. In fact, Donald Trump's numbers grew in the election. And so he did, in fact, there are House gains. And remember, though, you're running in Trump districts. So that's a challenge by itself. In the Senate, look, we picked up 2 seats. I don't think anyone can blame Democrats for not holding on to Alabama. And I've got my criticism of Democrats, but I don't think you can fault Democrats for not holding on to Alabama. And we picked up 2 Senate seats. Goodness, I wish we could have done more. And we have a chance to begin to turn that around and maybe get to 50 in Georgia. And keep an eye on that. It's tough for sure to win 1, if not 2, but something's happening there. And what's happening there is happening around the country. If you look at the Biden victory, for example, its magnitude wasn't just in its numbers, but where the votes came from. Georgia, for the first time since Jimmy Carter in 1980, is voting Democratic. Arizona, the first time since 1996, when Bill Clinton ran, voted Democratic. We now have, we brought back the blue wall. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania came back. States that were solidly red at one point were much more competitive than ever before, like North Carolina or like Texas, for example. So there is a change happening. It's defined in many ways. It's defined by educated versus those who don't have a college degree. And that's always troubles me, that category, because it many facts, I think it's offensive when it shouldn't be. People who work hard, who don't have a college degree, still make a great contribution to our country. We have to always respect that. But there's a divide there. There's a divide certainly in terms of suburbs and metropolitan areas versus rural areas. And so there's a factor to consider in that too. But there's no question, the Biden victory was achieved because we didn't have the threat of a third-party candidacy, number one. And number two, he was able to turn suburban regions around in these swing states and reach out to them. Now, why didn't it reach out to House members? Why didn't it reach out to more Senate members? Clearly, it was the nature of the district, but also there's a real challenge Democrats have with messaging. And let me put it to you this way. I've debated Kayleigh McEnany on CNN. I've debated Kellyanne Conway on different networks, as well as representatives of the NRA and the opponents of Planned Parenthood. When we go on the attack, when we bring up, and I am very aggressive in terms of bringing up the facts and the issues, they used to say simply things like, well, that's not true. And that was the discussion. And initially I thought defensively, gee, did I get my facts wrong? And I go back and research it. Of course I didn't get my facts wrong.
Right.
That was their precursor to using the phrase fake news. And that's the way they deal with the truth. When Democrats are attacked and they throw out phony charges like defund the police, or talk about the Democrats who are creating violence around the Democratic violent cities and Democrats creating violence, we go into group therapy. We blame each other.
Right.
Democratic members of Congress say, yeah, but that's the other guys. I didn't say that. Or I'll never say it again. Or I didn't really mean it. The point is, we get defensive, we blame each other, we validate these false charges. And frankly, that's an example of what we're facing here. You're going to hear many Democratic members of Congress say, oh, it's, you've heard some, not many, but some say, oh, it's the progressive, it's the socialist agenda, the defund police agenda. There is no agenda to defund the police. Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer were very clear and decisive in putting that down and making it clear, as did our candidates across the country, that we're not defunding the police. Talking about reallocating resources is very different. Police talk about that. They don't want to be in the social welfare business. They don't want to be in the casework business or being a counselor for homeless people. They're very clear about that. They understand that their role has changed and has to change. So I think that's just one example. But we have to really examine for a moment, how is it that Donald Trump, who never condemned right-wing violence, that in fact excused a domestic terror threat called QAnon, who actually never spoke up against violence that was perpetrated by Proud Boys and the others, wouldn't even condemn white supremacists. How did he become the voice of law and order? How is it when you see crime and violence and the murder rates rising in cities run by Republicans, like Florida, like in Miami or Jacksonville, or in Tulsa, for example, or other locations around the country? How is it that wasn't part of the discussion? How did that become accepted discourse? And why weren't we more aggressive and more emphatic in responding to it? How is it that we're advocating providing universal health care, which I think is a basic right to everyone? How does that become a threat to our economy? How does that become socialism? There are many models that have been presented where you can have guaranteed health care for every American and not lose your personal health care benefits. Why we were clear in laying that out. You can stand for law and order and still be for justice, the principles of the Black Lives Matter movement, and for criminal justice reform. There's no conflict with that. But I think Democrats too often get into a defensive apologist posture. They're so desperate to pander to either the special interest or the donor class, whoever it may be, that many of them, I think, validate these kinds of false charges, these kinds of false attacks. I think that's something we have to be very mindful of looking at. I mean, you can be for comprehensive immigration reform, to give a pathway to citizenship for the 12 to 14 million living here undocumented, and we should be for that, and still not be for open borders. In fact, at one point, there were 68 US senators, Republican and Democrat alike, that supported a pathway for citizenship for the undocumented living here. Peter King supports that position. Yet too many Democrats go on the air and say, we can't advocate an open borders policy. It's not feasible. Nobody is. And I know that who they're pandering to. I know they're using this to raise money, to try to show they're not one of them. But it's an act of cowardice that is, I think, people see through for the hypocrisy it represents, and and the intellectual dishonesty it represents as well, and in fact, the danger it represents to our country. So I think there are many examples like that, where I think Democrats, and it's funny, Steve Israel very wisely pointed out that Republicans are very good at talking to the gut, and Democrats talk cerebrally.
Mhm.
And I think we've seen that time and again. We've got to be much better at talking to the feelings and concerns of people, not just, and you can't do that with a 12-point plan. You got to do that by connecting with people. Another example is the Green New Deal, expanding renewable jobs. Tom Friedman pointed out we didn't run out of, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. We stopped the Stone Age because we developed better tools and we advanced our thinking and our technology and our abilities. The future in America is through green technology. And that's not just computer coding. It's also the mechanics of building solar panels, of building wind farms, of building battery facilities, I'm sorry,
Yes.
power plants, battery solar plants. There are a whole range of new opportunities in renewables that provide an economic future and a job force future. We shouldn't shy away from that. And the same way, we should acknowledge that natural gas is a transition from oil. It's non-fossil, and it's an important transition. We shouldn't be putting down people working in that industry. We're trying to diminish what they're doing. They're union jobs, and they're an important part of our economy, and they're not fossil fuels. But we shouldn't in any way back off from a commitment to develop renewable jobs and move forward on an environment, on recognizing the climate crisis is real. And we have to deal with it by developing alternatives in the renewable field and recognizing we have alternatives in the way we live our life. But it's funny. I think part of the problem is too, it's not just the messaging we hear from too many elected Democrats. I think it's also the way we get our news, the way that we relate to each other. I think it's unfortunate to note that it's just a trend that's more common than ever before. We get our news through social media, and more often than we ever did. And ultimately, social media is tailored to our points of view. We watch news to be reinforced. We don't watch news to learn. We watch news, we curate our media to reinforce our thoughts, our ideas, our values, versus looking to expand them. And even when you search online, the algorithm, look, if you search climate crisis, and this was, I think, related in a new a Netflix movie called Social Dilemma. If you go online and search climate crisis, it'll come up reflecting the climate crisis is real, depending on who you are and what you look for, or it's a hoax, depending upon your orientation and the other media you look for. So I think that's something we've got to be profoundly aware of, because quite frankly, in order to build a better dialogue, we have to understand the thoughts out there, learn sometimes when we're wrong, learn sometimes when we're not connecting and why we're not connecting with people, understand the concerns and fears people have about their economic future, about their retirement future, and begin to address that. I have a lot of confidence that a Biden presidency is well equipped to do it. I say that because at this particular time, when we have after 4 years of such a divisive presidency, he has the capacity to unite and bring people together. And I think what's important to remember, the cornerstone of our democracy is based upon trust. And that, I think, to me, sums it up. The idea that you trust your vote's going to be counted. You trust that your voice is going to be heard. You trust that the government listens to you, responds to you, and is able to address your problems. We've had 4 years of a president who's diminished every aspect of our confidence in government, all based upon how he was treated. He assaulted the FBI and the Department of Justice when they were, in fact, doing their job, and diminished our confidence in them by putting a bunch of stooges and basically co-conspirators in there like Robert Barr to add to his narrative about the fact we couldn't trust the Department of Justice. He ignored his own top appointees in the FBI, national intelligence, and in cybersecurity when they said Russia attacked our democracy to help Donald Trump and hurt Hillary Clinton. Literally empowered the Russian disinformation campaign by dismissing that type of evidence, and further helped the Russian disinformation campaign about democracy with what he's saying now about our election. It's worth noting that not just Democrats, but Republican inspectors at the polling places, Republican boards of elections commissioners, Republican statewide officials in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, and Arizona are all pointing out this election, quite a tribute to the country, a record turnout of an election that Donald Trump tried to sabotage by underfunding the post office and underfunding our board of elections. This election proceeded peacefully. It proceeded without any examples of organized fraud or any sort of effort to a national campaign to undermine our democracy. It proceeded really as a great tribute to the democratic values that defined America. Yet here we have a president basically empowering Russia's message, attacking our democracy, and while we don't feel it personally, its impact around the world is extraordinary. When you have a president attacking the very definition of what makes America so unique, our democratic system. So there are real consequences to what's happening internationally over what he is doing. But restoring that trust is critical, and there, I think, are a number of ways we should be calling upon our members of Congress to do it. First and foremost, we have to define that government can be of service and can play a decisive role in our lives for the good. There are many examples of it, but we've got to get back to that message. You know, at the end of Roosevelt's first term, there was a major map that was put out about all the ways government changed people's lives. At the end of the first term, Roosevelt initiatives were building the Triborough Bridge. They were building the Midtown Tunnel, the LA Aqueduct, the Kansas City Civic Auditorium. And there are examples all over the country like that were so important. And we have to get back to thinking in a dramatic way about what government can do to show it's making a difference. The first and most important step is dealing with this pandemic honestly, dealing with it scientifically, and bringing it to an end. And having Joe Biden there, bringing people together around the need to wear masks for public health and safety is the first step. Respecting science and not diminishing it the way this president did. The way Donald Trump is really with criminal negligence, the way he's attacked the scientific community, the way he's diminished public safety protocols for his own political agenda, the way he's endangered lives with his mass super spreader rallies. We need to restore confidence in our science community to begin to bring this pandemic to an end. Likewise, we've got to rebuild the economy. And that begins with finally a bold infrastructure. It's been talked about. Everyone's agreed upon it, but nobody's ever followed through on it. But that certainly is, I think, an important step that's got to be taken. And secondly, I think one issue that's very important to me is campaign finance reform.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Barney Frank said, Congress is the only industry where politicians are expected to get $10,000 or $20,000 from a political action committee corporation and not expected to give anything in return. Of course, we know that's nonsense. It's not true. But we have to have aggressive campaign finance reform. And Republicans would agree with us. Democrats have got to lead by example. The idea that members of Congress, Democrats certainly as well, among leading the way, are bankrolling their campaigns from the very businesses they have to oversee and regulate in front of their committees. So the industries that go in front of, let's say, the Ways and Means Committee, that need the Ways and Means Committee to survive, that need the Ways and Means Committee for benefits in the tax code and favors and the like, they're bankrolling those Democratic and Republican members, as they are other members of other committees. So campaign finance reform, I think, is another very pivotal way to do that. And thirdly is an idea that struck me that Dan Coates presented. Dan Coates is a Republican conservative member of Congress. He was Donald Trump's director of national intelligence. He also stood up under oath and pointed out that Russia was attacking our country to help Donald Trump and hurt Hillary Clinton, and pointed out that President Trump had given him no instruction to counteract it. Very brave, bold testimony. He ultimately resigned from his position, as so many of other Trump appointees did, calling out the president for his misconduct. But he proposed the idea of having a bipartisan presidential commission. It could be former Supreme Court justices, former presidents. It could be leaders in various industries. It could be former congressional leaders, to validate for the American people that our election process is safe, is secure, is fair, and to in fact call out when they see problems as well. Because our biggest challenge is restoring confidence in our government, trust in the American experiment. That means trust in our democracy, trust in the checks and balances that exist in our government. Donald Trump revealed to all of us just how a president how we as a country rely upon norms. And when you're dealing with an autocrat and a demagogue, the norms don't count. So you ignore congressional oversight. What are they going to do to you? You don't reveal your taxes. Who's going to force you? And one violation after another. You don't brief Congress, give them proper intelligence briefings as you're required to do, because that's what always was done. We've never had a president who wasn't a patriot. In Donald Trump, we had a president who betrayed our country. And so that's why I think it's very important to have Congress play a much more aggressive role, putting laws into place so they can't get it through the Senate, making it a public issue, having an oversight committee that would be a bipartisan to ensure the safety of our elections, looking at bold ideas to show the American people what works and what can work, and the government can matter in their lives. I think they're important issues we've got to look at going forward. And I think, quite frankly, we've got to hold Democrats and Republicans in Congress accountable to get there. Let me give you a tip before I go to questions. Every member of Congress will tell you they're a purple district. They're a safe seat. They're not a safe seat, they're a purple district. Everyone's coming at them. They say it because they raise money that way. Now, I'm not saying anyone should take their congressional district for granted ever. I'm not suggesting that. And we all have to work hard to keep a Democratic majority, in my view. But let's not let that become an excuse for not showing leadership. We're lucky in the 3rd Congressional District, represented by Tom Suozzi. It's a solid Democratic seat. Not that we don't have to work it, not that he doesn't have to work it, but it's been a Democratic seat going back to before Tom, it was Steve Israel. Before Steve Israel, Gary Ackerman. It's actually grown more Democratic. And so we should be demanding and expecting leadership. In fact, Hillary Clinton won the seat by 6 percentage points. So I think that, but look at Kathleen Rice's district. That's a district before that by Carolyn McCarthy, before Carolyn was solidly Republican. That's a district where even the Democrats vote Republican. And so it's a much tougher district. You know, I give Kathleen Rice a lot of credit for standing up and taking on the injustices, the corruption of the Trump administration, standing up for strong democratic values in a tougher district. And so I think there are certain, and there are some districts like Max Rose in Staten Island and Brooklyn. It's a miracle Max ever got to Congress. It's a district that has been Democrat since the early 80s, Republican since the early 80s. So I would expect Max Rose to reflect my values, and I understand that. He's got different constituents to talk to. And he was very bold in many ways, and unfortunately, it looks like he's heading to defeat. So we got to respect where people come from in the country, the different types of districts they have. But where necessary, we should be also demanding leadership from those members of Congress who are in a position to provide it. So it's certainly going to be, we're coming into, I look at the Biden presidency as the beginning of the process of restoring the American dream and restoring the ideals of our country. We've got a lot more work to do. And it's making sure Nancy Pelosi remains as Speaker and keeping our Democratic majority in the House strong and united. And also is about focusing on trying to pick up 1, if not 2 seats in Georgia. I think we can get them both. We certainly have to try, because that's so pivotal for it's so pivotal not just for the nation, but also for New York. Having Chuck Schumer as the majority leader is critical in terms of providing the aid and relief we need, by making sure also that we restore the SALT tax deductions that were taken away from us. Schumer's been a leader on that issue, but he needs to be the majority leader to get it done. So we're making progress. I know, what's the expression? You can't be progressive or idealistic and think the glass is half empty, but it was a tremendous victory on election day. The numbers are only going to grow. We have a Democratic House, and we've got a lot of work to do to restore America. Questions?
Yeah, thank you, Robert. That's amazing. So if people have questions, there's the Q&A button on the bottom, and I'll be reading some, but I have a question just to start off. Thank you. That was great. Regarding
It was a bit of a ramble. I'm sorry about that, but just
no, it's terrific. You know, the webinars, this kind of webinar structure is a little bit more difficult for the speaker, so it's terrific. You did a great job. And my question,
proud to be here with all this. What's going on? What are your questions?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just have a question. There's been a lot of talk about trying to get to the electors and switching over that, you know, trying to get them to switch to Republican. Is that a possibility to overthrow Biden and make Trump president again? I mean, you have Pompeo who's about, you know, saying that it's going to be an easy transition for a second Trump administration, and, you know, all of these kind of nonsense things going on. Is there any reality to that, or is it just there's just all of this craziness that's just going to be thrown out and not honored?
It was true when Hayes ran against Tilden, and Tilden got his electors taken away from him in the 1800s. I think I got that right, the early 1800s. But since then, it's not the case. And that's, by the way, let's understand, while it's not going to happen this year, it's not an option. Just a little bit of history for you, just a 30-second historical note. Had the Bush campaign lost in the US Supreme Court to Al Gore, and the recount was going to continue, and Al Gore was picking up votes in the recount. It was initially 1,900 votes for Bush, then it went down to 300 votes for Bush. The Florida legislature was going to choose the electors and declare the state recount null and void. So under the Constitution, state legislators can choose the electors and bypass the will of the people. And that almost happened in 2000, because had they lost in the Supreme Court, the nuclear option was going to be just cast aside the vote, disqualify, say the vote didn't count, and just have the Florida Republican legislature choose the electors. So it's always so it is a constitutional possibility. It is not a possibility here. It's not for a bunch of reasons. One, Joe Biden's win was too big. He won in too many parts of the country. He's going to win 74 more electoral votes.
Great.
than Donald Trump will get. Can't even say his name. So he's not just in terms of the number, but in terms of electoral votes. So it's not feasible. It's not going to happen. And it goes back to my initial point about political pundits with too much time on their hands.
Okay. So a question with the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a website? I mean, the Reach Out America Executive Board was already discussing about working for the Senate, the 2 seats to try to flip the Senate in Georgia, so we can get those seats, get that majority. Is there any like website, place we should be giving money besides possible? Let me finish, because there's another question. Okay. Possible postcard, you know, Harriet, we've been all going crazy talking about this. Postcards, should we be sending postcards and doing that again? Would that be effective, or should we just be doing phone calling, money, and where should we send our money?
Well, there were each candidate, Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff, both have campaign committees established. And you should be giving I will give you, and I should have had it with me, and I'm sorry, I will give you the names of their campaign committees. You can look it up online just as easily.
Sure.
But I will give them to you later. But there's Ossoff, I think it's Ossoff for Virginia, and Warnock. They both have separate campaign committees. Donate to them, and believe me, it counts. By the way, the new line, Republicans, and just to show you how it works in terms of trying to get Democrats on the defensive, the new line from Republicans is that all this out-of-state money is a liability for the Democratic candidates. It compromises them, and it's a political weapon for them. Do you have any idea how much out-of-state money is going in to support the Republicans running for the Senate in Georgia? Okay, the only liability is when there's not out-of-state money going in to support these candidates. They need it. They are think about every supervillain in Gotham, okay? They're all bankrolling these 2 Republicans running for the Senate in Georgia. So we need Reach Out America to stand up to the Koch brothers, to stand up to all of the different special interests out there that want to deny climate change is real, et cetera, et cetera. So that support matters a lot. If it's $25 a person, if it's $50 whatever it may be, $5 a month, whatever you want to do, now's the time. And I will get you a contact for phone calls and for phone bank because it's important.
Great, thank you. Okay, a question from Karen. It says none of these reforms, voting, police, criminal justice, Green New Deal, infrastructure will happen if McConnell still is in charge of the Senate. I guess it's a question, will anything get through if we don't get the majority in the Senate? Or is it just going to be 4 years of frustration? Or do you think Joe Biden's going to be able to like pull people from the Republican?
I think there are two options that are very feasible, two options that are very real in the short term. One is a coronavirus relief package, because all of a sudden now you see the red states being so severely impacted. Utah's governor put a mask mandate in place. North Dakota's hospitals are beyond capacity. And this is taking place more and more around the country in the red states. So all of a sudden it becomes a very real imperative. And I think, and we've got to make sure that we move away from the argument. The Republicans claim they want to put the money in the people's pockets, not give it to government bureaucracies. Let's be clear. When you're giving state, county, and towns financial assistance, that's helping them avoid hospital personnel layoffs, laying off police, laying off firefighters, laying off teachers and educators. It's helping our county and towns here. I mean, Laura Curran has done a heroic job. Judy Bosworth has been a champion in terms of navigating Nassau County through Laura Curran, and Judy Bosworth, her leadership in the town of North Hempstead has been heroic and in terms of guiding us through how to respond. But the cost of the town has been extraordinary. The cost has been for the county extraordinary. So so that's why this federal support is so critical. So yes, we want to make sure it goes to individuals, but it's not an either or option. And let's be clear about that. New York State certainly needs the support. And I've got to give a shout out to, if she's on the call, Veronica Lurvy, town councilman from Great Neck, has just been, I've been with her at the food pantries and the food lines with her, and she's been at the front lines doing just a great job. And
great, thank you. Let's see, we have a question from Andrea Katz. If science is such a dirty word to so many people, why can't we use different words such as medical to get the message across to people? Because words do matter.
By the way, before we get to Andrea, one other short-term achievement besides the idea of the coronavirus relief package, I think will get done. Infrastructure, I think, is finally going to happen. It should have happened years ago, quite frankly. I think both parties dropped the ball, unfortunately. But there's a real need right now as part of the response to the pandemic to build up our economy. So infrastructure is very real. On the other issues, like the Green New Deal or climate change, you know something? We got to keep the pressure on.
Right.
We've got to drive it home, because whether you're in a Republican district or Democratic district, you're breathing, we all breathe the same air, drink the same water, and we know the impact it's having as this climate crisis spreads. And certainly we see the impact it's having in our Black and brown communities, how they're being disproportionately impacted. So we've got to keep fighting on that. I know it's tough, but we've got to, and frankly, you look at any major change, it doesn't come from politicians sitting in the back of a room having a drink. It comes because public pressure demands it.
Right.
So that's why we've got to keep the demand going.
Absolutely. Okay. So just getting back to that question about words. If science is such a dirty word, would it help to use medical? Or is that, would that help in any way?
Well, you see how the Trump administration already has discounted the concept of what their medical doctors are telling them.
Right. They
discounted the Center for Disease Control. They've discounted the Food and Drug Administration. They mock their doctors publicly. I think we can use the word science and not run away from it. I think we've got to build. I think there is respect out there. You look at the polling around the country, and we get to polling at another moment. But universally, people recognize the climate crisis is real. Donald Trump's own administration issued a report. They do every, I think it's 10 years, every federal department, be it Homeland Security or the Defense Department or Health and Human Services, issues an analysis on the climate crisis. Across the board, universally, they all recognize not just the climate crisis was real, but how limited our time was to address it. So I don't want to run away from words like medical or science, and I'm not going to let, frankly, Donald Trump and his group rewrite the script for us.
Great. Excellent. So let's see, Rita asks, do you have any idea how the local races are going? Do we know yet? I know what they said it would be take 2 weeks, but
Well, in New York, under New York state law, the votes can't be counted until, I believe it's 7 days after election day. Every ballot has got to be postmarked by election day, but then there's a grace period of 7 days for all the ballots to be mailed in. And so that grace period, I think, has come to an end now, and the balloting will begin maybe even today. They may be closed for Veterans Day, but it'll begin tomorrow. The expectation is that while you saw Republicans coming out in larger number on the machines, when you look at the absentee ballots, they're predominantly Democratic. So you're going to see strong Democratic wins, certainly in North Hempstead, take place for Anna Kaplan, Gina Soliti, our new Assemblywoman, and for, of course, Tom Suozzi. And you're going to see Kathleen Rice, who actually led in the machine count, which is interesting because she's been so bold and so courageous, but she, with that Republican turnout, still led in the machine count. She's on her way to victory. A lot of worry about the state senators, Jimmy Gorin, Kevin Thomas, and also Monica Martinez. They ran so poorly in the machine count on election day when you're counting people who showed up on the machines that we don't know if the absentee ballots can make it up for them. I certainly hope so. I mean, I know one state senator, Jimmy Gorin in particular, what a great public official he's been. What a loss if he's not there.
Rita also asked, and this is something that's baffling me. Why do the Republicans continue to back Trump's fraudulent claims? Like, how come they're not doing this transition gracefully?
Rita, I love Rita Hall, and that question is
who doesn't?
Yeah, Rita Hall's awesome, and Rita, that question can prompt us to stare into the ceiling at night, or go into group therapy, or just recognize that of course they're not going to put their national duty first. Of course they're not going to put patriotism before party. Why would they start now?
Yeah, that's true.
And
yeah.
So, I mean, Mike Pompeo's comments, which are, disgraceful on its face, think about what that says around the world when America's top diplomat refuses to recognize the results of a democratic election. But if you look at the response, it's quite remarkable that world leaders are calling Joe Biden, congratulating him, and Kamala Harris congratulating her. But maybe 3 or 4 senators, Republican senators, have acknowledged it. And let's remember this day and this time, because if ever there was a time to stand up for our country, now is that time to stand up for our government, our democracy, and their conduct is typical of why the Republican Party, the Republicans, I should say, the Republican senators, with few exceptions, have really let America down. It is just staggering. And by the way, just to expand on that point, it's going to get worse. Donald Trump's not going anywhere. The only way he can make money is by staying on the political scene. Gets a book deal, gets speaking engagements. He talks about running for re-election. He's trying to make a move to take over the Republican Party apparatus. It's another revenue stream for him. Talk of putting his son in charge of the organization. So understand that this is only going to accelerate. They treat the political process like a political shakedown and have no mistake, no confusion about it. So this is what he's going to be doing now to maintain control. And quite frankly, these Republican senators are so fearful of him, so frightened of him, that they're going to do what they always do, with few exceptions. Mitt Romney, Lisa Murkowski have stepped up on occasion. Mitt Romney certainly has stepped up, but they're going to follow along. And it's ultimately it will catch up. One quick aside to all this, I'm rambling a bit, but this is the best part of the answer. He, as many of you know, is trying to form his own Trump TV network. He has been very bitter at Fox for, as he puts it, putting Democrats on the air, and said on election day, in the old days, this wouldn't have been allowed. Now, once he forms Trump TV, he brings Bill O'Reilly out of the crypt and puts him on the air. He brings over Sean Hannity. He brings over all the rejects from Fox and puts them on the air and forms his own TV network. it will give the Murdoch organization fits. It will really be quite interesting watching the war between those two networks fight it out. Be curious to watch, but no, he's going to be on the scene for a while. Hopefully, Joe Biden, and I believe this, provides an alternative, and he shows what leadership can be. And hopefully Democrats stand up and are not intimidated. And I have every confidence in Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer that they will be strong, important leaders, because they have been in the past. And they'll show what we can do as a country to move forward. I think that's important.
Thank you. Well, the one comment on that is what you said before about Democrats. It's like the Republicans play real dirty, and it's like they show up with a machine gun, and we're there with a little like pocket knife. So I appreciate Nancy Pelosi. I think yes, absolutely. But Chuck Schumer, sometimes I feel he doesn't have that strength that Nancy Pelosi does. And
well, remember, Patty, Nancy Pelosi is the speaker. That gives her an arsenal to work with.
Right.
Before she was speaker, there were the same criticisms of her.
Right.
Why wasn't she stronger? I think Chuck Schumer honestly has done an extraordinary job with a very difficult position, really difficult. And remember, now we have 48, hopefully more senators. I want him, but let me tell you something. I want him in a showdown with Mitch McConnell more than anyone, because he knows how to, he knows he's very skilled, not just as a negotiator, but he's very skilled applying the political pressure. So I think we're lucky he's there, believe me.
Right.
He's extraordinary.
Right. Okay. So I'm having so many people are like texting me and the questions. Do you think that Trump, after all this, when he's not president, is going to go to jail? Do you think that will happen?
We're going to have to wait and see. My personal belief is when he finally has to deal with the reality that he lost, the pardons are going to start flying. Roger Stone, Michael Flynn, Steve Bannon, they're all going to get pardoned. And I personally believe, and I could be wrong, most smart people say I'm wrong, which means I probably am. I think he probably resigns a week early.
Yeah, that's what we're all hearing.
And Mike Pence pardons him.
Right.
Is Mike Pence that much of a lackey? Is he that much of a dysfunctional schmuck? Yeah, he is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's quite possible he gets pardoned there. There still are two very important state and Manhattan investigations going on by Tish James and by Cy Vance, the Manhattan DA. They're serious. So I think he and his family might have to deal with reality here. I think there is real legal exposure for them.
Okay. All right. Eric Swenson asks, with Trump out of office, will Republican senators be more willing to work the aisle despite McConnell?
It depends. I think a coronavirus relief, yes. I think an infrastructure, it's possible. I think maybe even on some environmental initiatives, because it impacts their states, it's possible. But don't forget, he still has enormous control of the Republican Party base. He may have Trump TV network out there to publicly bludgeon these people if they get out of line. And will he overplay his hand? Will they finally stand up? I don't think they will. So I think he will continue to bully and intimidate and cower them because he can. And because at the end of the day, they've shown time and time again, it's not about they put their party politics before the country's best interests.
Phyllis asks, and Phyllis, this is my question too. How did Susan Collins win?
Wow.
I went, well, Mitch McConnell too, for that matter. I just went.
Boy, that one hurt. Well, first of all, Mitch McConnell, of course he won. He was always going to win. Same thing with Lindsey Graham. Those races were never in doubt. I'm not criticizing anybody for supporting them. I think we've got to be a little more focused about where we spend our resources, quite frankly. And Mitch McConnell was never going to lose in Kentucky. The same way Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. Remember, when the top of the ticket does well, especially in a presidential, you saw more party line voting than ever before. So you saw when the Trump vote was strong, it helped the rest of the ticket. And when you saw Biden strong, it helped the rest of the ticket. Susan Collins, it is a travesty that she's there. She treats every decision like it's a third act of Aida, and then she does whatever she's told. It's the best scam in Washington. I think what it came down to was deep ties in Maine. I think I think this is where Democrats hurt themselves by not being more aggressive and standing up to defund the police rhetoric. And I think the violence issues hurt us by not because we weren't more aggressive in counteracting it. I mean, when you saw mayors like in Portland tolerating violent zones or something of that effect, it should have been nationally condemned and it wasn't. I think Democrats could have been much more aggressive. I'm not saying back away from criminal justice reform. I'm not suggesting back away from supporting important principles that we advocate in terms of justice for standing up to systemic racism in our communities. I'm not suggesting back away from that at all. But that doesn't mean you tolerate violence or let it be defined as Democrat. And that was, to me, inexcusable. And we were not every day talking about the fact that this is a crisis afflicting America, Republican and Democratic cities. That, it's also important to remember we did a lot of good messaging too. I mean, one of the reasons Joe Biden's president, because he was so clear and so strong about responding to COVID and rebuilding the economy. That's one of the reasons that Joe Biden's president.
He's been very cool too through all
So
of this.
Maine, she has deep, deep ties in that state. They are a state that has a lot of parochial interests. It's a small state with personal connections matter. That was a factor. And I think we were put on the defensive over issues regarding violence in urban areas and the defund argument.
Jeanette asks, how do you think the Democratic Party should reward Stacey Abrams for the great job that she's been doing for with voter suppression and getting out the vote?
I would canonize her. I would declare her a saint.
Right.
Think about Stacey Abrams and what she's done.
Remarkable.
She ran for governor of Georgia, an African-American and a woman running for governor of Georgia. She won that election. Let's be clear about that. It was stolen from her. 1.5 million votes were purged, taken away under one false premise. I mean, it's really well documented. Don't take my word for it. She had every reason to be frustrated and despair. She just focused, moved forward, registered, organized, mobilized. Joe Biden carried Georgia because of Stacey Abrams. The way we can reward Stacey Abrams is by electing her governor of Georgia.
Well, that'd be great.
She deserves it. That's the position she wanted.
Right.
And the nation needs her in that position. She is truly an American hero.
Until then, do you think it would be wise to make her the head of the DNC?
Frankly, if she wants it, I think it'd be great. I think she could do better.
To get out the vote, that's for sure.
I think she'd be great as chair of the DNC. I'd like to see her as governor of Georgia. And I'd like to see her on that path instead. But whatever choice she makes, I'm going to be there cheering her on.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, let's see. Okay, Phyllis asks, how real is the division between the progressive Democrats and more centralist Democrats? They're placing this up to right-wing media. I don't know if this is a fact or fiction.
You know, I think there are divisions for sure. I'm being straight with you. I think there are divisions. I think there's a very concentrated effort to try to make sure we stay together because we have to be united as a party. We have to be united because the majority's gotten thinner. And we need to be united to support Joe Biden to try to get anything done. So I think you're going to see greater unity on policy. I am deeply offended by the scapegoating of the progressive community by some Democrats in Congress when it's totally unwarranted. I mean, let's face it, as I said before, some of these districts were impossible to hold on to. And in a very tough year with Trump at the top of the ticket. And I think Democrats should have been more aggressive in responding to the violence and the defund argument and the labels, for sure. But I think also we have to acknowledge the progressive community was so critical in creating a sense of activism, voter registration, engagement. They were so important in terms of, look at the record number of young people that voted, the record number of support we had in so many different key cores we didn't have before. So I think that's why I think it's very short-sighted to try to scapegoat the progressive community. If a Democratic member of Congress wasn't strong enough on his own or her own to stand up to the phony arguments thrown at them by the right wing, they shouldn't be blaming the progressive community. And likewise, I'm be very honest with you, anyone from the progressive community that's talking about defund the police, is wrong. It's dangerous. It's dishonest, and it's a misleading argument. I should say more than dishonest. It's a misleading. It's not a real solution to the problem. And there's never any excuse for defending violence, but no one defended violence. So I think I think we have to be very careful not to be on the defensive, not to start pointing fingers at each other, and to recognize that we have to do a much better job at messaging. We can learn from the progressive community about social media. We should be using them to engage. We should recognize the contributions they made and recognize how, as a Democratic Party, we have to work together to move forward. We can't do it separately.
Absolutely. I have another question from, this is a totally different direction. Warren Schreiber, will our relationship with Israel and the Palestinians change under a Biden administration?
You know, I think it'll be stronger. I think it'll be stronger. Look, I think the Abraham Accords were real, and hopefully they are real and they're tangible. It's a real achievement. I think it's very important that the embassy moved to Jerusalem. I think it's a good thing that they did. I have no problem. I think it's an achievement. But I think when the Trump administration, in fact, withdrew from northern Syria and turned northern Syria over to Iran and the Russians, that was a very dangerous act to engage in, very counterproductive to stability in the Middle East and to Israel's security. And I think Joe Biden's a leader that the world knows, a leader that the Middle East, that is recognized in the Middle East as a very credible, responsible, and strong leader. And I think the fact that he represents stability and represents insight and knowledge, I think makes him a much more important player in the Middle East than Donald Trump could ever be. And I also want to say one other point. I have been, like many on this call, profoundly alarmed about the growth of anti-Semitism and hate crimes around the country, and bigoted speech being accepted around the country as a norm, as an accepted norm, as an accepted part of life. We've seen a record increase of attacks on the Catholic community, African American, Hispanic community, whether it's verbally, whether it's physical, whether it's harassment. And we've certainly seen this towards the Jewish community, profoundly so. I've seen it certainly towards the gay community as well. We're seeing it every quarter of life. And my point to you is we've got to stop treating this like it's a partisan issue. I'll condemn any member of Congress, Republican or Democrat, who engages in anti-Semitic behavior. And I think one of the real travesties here is that unfortunately, right-wing media has allowed this to become a partisan issue. They'll talk about a Democratic member of Congress that says something that's wrong or hateful, and they should call them out. But then when Congressman Matt Gaetz from Florida, Republican conservative, invites a Holocaust denier to the State of the Union, they say nothing about it. So I think we have to start coming together and certainly treating issues of hate crimes and hate incidents in a very bipartisan way. That has not been happening in the last 4 years. And it really is an issue I've worked on a good part of my life, and it really is very worrisome to me. So Warren Schreiber, that's a long answer to your question. I'm very optimistic about Biden's leadership in the Middle East, and I'm hopeful that with Donald Trump out of the White House, we can deal with bigotry and hateful behavior and take it on in a bipartisan way. And most of all, Patty, Warren Schreiber, happy Veterans Day to you. And thank you for your service to our nation.
Thank you, that's great. Josie wants to know about this, what's going to happen. What do you think is going to happen with the Supreme Court?
Nothing good. The reality is without a Senate majority, any real restructuring of the court, adding federal district court judges, looking at even term limits for Supreme Court justices, any real reforms, I don't see happening. It's not feasible. I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's a damn shame because right now we have not judges. These judges were, look, Amy Barrett was not chosen from Star Search for her position. She was chosen to be there as a right-wing ideologue for Donald Trump. That's true for his appointees. And so I am profoundly worried about Roe v. Wade. I am worried about court cases that don't make it to the news, issues like regulations. And you've seen the Roberts Court abolish and dismiss many important regulations providing for oversight for for workers on job sites, for environmental protection and the like. So there'll be a lot of cases we're not going to read about in the papers that they're going to rule on or choose not to rule on. That'll be very detrimental. So I see a a dangerous ideology coming out of the Supreme Court. And we have to keep the pressure on locally to try to find legislative remedies for them.
Ellen asks, how did Mrs. Green, a QAnon supporter, ever get in?
You know, there are more QAnon supporters in Congress, in the Republican Party, than there are African Americans. Just think about that. In the Republican Congress, amongst all the Republican members of Congress, they've got one QAnon member and no African American member. Kind of tells you something. How did QAnon get to the Congress? They got there because the Republican Party elected her there. That's why, because Donald Trump refused to denounce a group that his own FBI director called a potential domestic terror threat. That's how they got there. It's an old story in history. Evil happens when wise people and people who know better do nothing. And so we have this dangerous, I mean, they're just not a demagogue. They're a domestic terror threat. And they now have a seat in Congress. It should haunt all of us.
All right. Sybil asks, is it possible that Republican Governor Larry Hogan of Maryland and Joe Manchin, Senator of Maryland, could be the future faces of a more nonpartisan Republican Party?
No. As long as Donald Trump continues to have a death grip on the Republican Party, either through Trump TV or through his database, he's got enormous data research his team has put together, or by controlling the Republican National Committee, no moderate voice, no voice that respects the Constitution is going to emerge. No voice that respects our country's history. So ultimately, there'll be a breaking point. I have no idea where it is. It is astonishing. I've never seen so many adults so easily bullied and intimidated. It's just astonishing. But no, you're not going to see, as long as Donald Trump remains, and by the way, he has to remain the dominant force because that's how he's making his money. Doesn't have too many other options.
That's kind of awful, right? Okay, Rita asks, this should be the last question, I think. I think you've worked really hard, Robert. It's been
Doing at my best, folks.
You've been great. Do you have any thoughts about Biden's cabinet?
I'm excited about it. I'm excited about the caliber of the people that are coming forward. Names you're hearing about: Michelle Flournoy, Secretary of Defense, exceptional individual. Pete Buttigieg, either at Veterans Affairs or at the United Nations, really an exemplary individual. Possibly Tony Blinken for Secretary of State, or Chris Coons of Delaware is a possibility. There are other names as well being talked about for state. Or Susan Collins is another, not Susan Collins,
Susan Rice?
Susan Rice, I'm sorry, yeah.
Sure.
Susan Rice is a possibility. But I think Blinken or Coons, I think, would be phenomenal in state. I have great respect for Tony Blinken in particular, extraordinary international diplomat. But so I think you're going to see a lot of folks of the Clinton-Obama pedigree, of that level of experience. And what's awesome are the people they're replacing. Stephen Miller's heading for the door. Mike Pompeo's out. And the list goes on, and starting from Donald Trump on, it's over. So you're going to see a restoration of literacy, integrity, and patriotism in the White House, and that's refreshing to see.
And hopefully arts, humanities, and animals in the White House.
Yes, that's for sure. No, I think, and by the way, I am excited about Dr. Jill Biden emerging as the first lady. I think she is an incredibly accomplished woman. And I've seen her speak on so many occasions. I've been with her on a number of occasions. Her respect and understanding of education, and talk about the arts and humanities. She's a real champion. And the first Italian American to be first lady of our country. And the president and the vice president's husband, Doug, first Jewish American to be on the national leadership team.
It's pretty exciting. I mean, we do have we can take a moment to be pretty invigorated and excited about what's going on and the change that's happening. But we also know very clearly that our work is really cut out for us to keep really pushing. We could take a breath. It's amazing how many people over this past 2 weeks said they can, once they heard Biden as the president-elect, the words that everybody has been using on television, friends, family, oh, I can breathe again. And so I think it's true. I think we could take a big breath, but we also have to realize this is a marathon and not a sprint. And we've got a lot of work to do.
Can I just say in conclusion,
Sure.
just enjoy the victory.
Yeah, we got
Not
to.
play a leadership role in throwing out the most corrupt, incompetent, and un-American, demagogic president we've ever had. You've beat an autocrat. You beat a man who represents a threat to the very fabric of our society, the very principles of our Constitution. That's not small stuff. That's a real achievement. Not too many countries in the world have the ability to do that. We do, you do. And so celebrate this and enjoy it. And know that we have challenges ahead for sure. But we also have great achievements to our record and a lot of momentum to move forward. So enjoy the victory. Everyone, please be safe. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving and great holiday season. And I look forward to marching with you, knocking on doors when we can go back out and do it again with you, and standing with you, because you're really champions for justice and champions for democracy. And I'm proud to always be on your team.
We look forward to that day, Robert. And thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom and your foresight. And I just want to remind everyone that we will be sending out, we'll get the websites where we should be sending money for the Georgia senators. So if you want to send money to the best possible place where they can actually get the money, we'll send it out to you, and we will be moving forward. So thank you all very much, and wishing everybody a good holiday, and we'll see you in December. So thank you, Robert. You have a great day. Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.